Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. Yes, we are right back to it after that hiatus, and I don't want to waste a second getting to our guest today. I will tell you this is one of a couple of interviews I have lined up over the next few weeks, so the good news is that you won't have to listen to just me for a while. Although, I do have to say, some folks have sent me some really juicy studies to dig into, and I promise I will get to those. Spoiler alert, they are not at all as impactful as they've been made out to be. I may even get the chance to disparage a certain technical university out of Boston for a little bit of overblown fuss about an extremely limited study, but that is the fun of this podcast after all. Anyway, my guest today is an internationally recognized world-leading academic in the field of construction safety. A chartered builder and a chartered building engineer, she has over 10 years' experience working on UK construction job sites, with over another 10 working as an academic in UK universities. Her last role in the UK was as a professor of construction sociology, and she moved to the US in 2022 to continue her work in the science of construction safety. She is currently joint coordinator of the International CIB Research Commission W099 Worker Health, Safety, and Wellbeing in Construction, and has presented her work to academic and industry audiences around the world. Please welcome Dr. Fred Sherratt. Fred, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here. I know we're going to have a really good discussion based on how we had our previous discussion when we met before. So I'm going to jump right in here. This is, of course, a podcast about research, and I'd like to know a little bit about your relationship to research. What does research mean to you?
Okay, so this starts off back when I was a kid. So I've always been around people that have done research because I was so proud that my mum has a PhD. It's in marine zoology. It's not in anything I'm even vaguely associated with. But being a little kid and being able to write Mr. and Dr. Rawlinson on the post back home was just so cool. So it was always something that I never thought I couldn't get involved in or anything like that. But of course, having my mum with her PhD, and that's how my mum and dad met, was at uni. I obviously did not go to college at 18. I did industry stuff till I was about 25. And then work sent me to university. So I didn't take a traditional academic route at all. So I went to uni at 25 when work sent me and they released, because I was already working in construction then. And my undergrad dissertation, my boss, Ray O'Rourke, who owns Lang O'Rourke, massive construction company in the UK, he'd actually gone on a stage and said, "Women are not needed on site." And me being me went, "Hello, hang about a minute." Now, of course, Ray had said this for all the right reasons, because what he wanted to do was start a proper conversation. And one of the ways to do that is you pull the pin out the grenade and you throw it, right? So all kudos to him for doing that. But I was like, right, I'm not having that. And it collided beautifully with my undergrad dissertation. And I use that to do some research. Were women needed on site? Were they not? What could they contribute? So through a combination of doing obviously a huge bunch of literature review, and I interviewed a bunch of men actually to ask them what they thought of women. Rather than just asking women about construction, I asked men what they thought about women about construction. And it came out with some really quite cool arguments. Certainly it fed into safety becoming my thing, because the more women you have on site, it alters expectations around physical labor and things like that. So you can then make the case that that would improve health and safety for everybody and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed being able to kind of answer my boss's kind of dramatic statement in a way that was actually grounded in validity, reliability, and generalizability, which of course underpins all research. And it was actually in the Viva for that undergrad dissertation that I'd made a throwaway comment about safety culture, and that's when my uni went, "Oh, you can do that next, we'll part fund you." And Lang O'Rourke, it's actually Paddy O'Rourke, Ray's brother, actually part funded my PhD, because I gave Paddy this dissertation that I'd written that basically slagged off his brother, and Paddy was loving this, God bless him. And so they kind of funded, and it went from there basically. So there you go, a bit of history, but then I didn't kind of leverage that as much as I should until I got to a point where I really wanted to kind of have a good argument with somebody about something, and it was research that enables you to have the data, the facts, the ideas, the theories, the hypotheses that enable you to do that in a robust way.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly what this podcast has been all about. So you've spent a lot of time, much of your career in the construction industry.
Hmm.
I started in the construction industry in private sector health and safety. So what does construction mean to you? What does this industry mean for you?
The best industry in the world, isn't it? There's nothing you can't do. That's my biggest takeaway. So I started as a secretary because obviously I'd left school and hadn't been to college and was just trying to find an hourly paid temp job. And that's what I did. And they sent me to a load of job sites. And I couldn't believe my luck. This is a space where you can just be you. You can be pretty loud. You can have lots of cups of tea. You get a bacon sandwich on a Friday morning. You get to play with massive bits of kit. You get to go up tower cranes and look down massive excavation. It's just wonderful. And the people, I absolutely adored the people. They were loud, they were unapologetic. There's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of shouting, there's usually somebody singing really badly. It's just a wonderful, chaotic, messy place. And I absolutely, it certainly ain't boring. I'll grant you that. And I read that,
Mm,
so there's that aspect. But the other thing is there isn't anything we can't do. And that attitude is often the downfall for construction safety, of course. It's the workarounds, it's the fixes, it's the ways that we can come together. You're changing the world, literally. I mean, I get to cruise past buildings in Manchester in England where I was working and go, oh, I built that. Yeah, of course I did all on my own. But it's just the massive sense of pride and achievement that you are actually making a positive difference in reality. But I love everything about it, and it's an industry in which folks that maybe don't fall into kind of traditional routes, like I mean, I didn't go to college when I was 18 because I would have really made a big mess of that. But for people who couldn't get on with school, who couldn't get on with these other things, there's opportunities for you to be amazing and be awesome in ways that people that spend their lives behind a computer just can't do. And it valorizes everybody. Everybody's work has a real good value in construction.
there's something you said in there, and I'm
Hmm.
going to take us off script here for just a
Sure.
second because you mentioned the workarounds, and
Hmm.
the ingenuity that happens in
Yeah.
construction can often be the bane of
Yeah.
construction safety, but it can also be at a really positive core of
Yes. Yeah.
construction
Yeah.
safety as well.
Hmm.
I know those are observations that I made.
Hmm.
Um, is that kind of been your experience as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, the fact that we do these workarounds, that you are on site coming up with these, like the amount of initiative, innovation that happens is phenomenal. That's what makes most of the stuff get built as well, by the way. It isn't that we only deviate and things go wrong. It's the deviation that makes that happen. And this means that I have to send you another paper that I wrote. So I pulled on a little thread of high reliability organizations into something called situational self-organizing. So that's an aspect of HRO theory that I thought had great potential in construction, because the way the construction industry is sort of set out, you get given your task, but how you do it in terms of the gang or the supervisory area or the crew is really up to them. So there is a requirement for some initiative and some kind of self-management. But I mean, the thing that always struck me was workers don't want to get hurt. It's to do with competing pressures and where things are coming from. So if you actually gave them the kind of agency and the power to manage their own health and safety, I'm not convinced that that would all just go horribly wrong. I think that would actually really enhance how we did things more collaboratively on site. So I think, yeah, the workarounds, most construction is a workaround. I'll tell you that for nothing. The stuff that goes right and the stuff that goes wrong. So that's sort of super important in how we can, and there is, I think, still scope to leverage that better rather than trying to do a kind of top-down implementation. We know that doesn't work. So that's something that I think has super potential within construction that we haven't quite explored enough in practice.
Yeah, awesome. So I know much of your work has been geared toward sociology and social science methodologies. What does that mean for you, and how is it different from other methodologies?
Okay, so construction is obviously in the School of Engineering, right? So I've always been in engineering my whole life. And I kind of am an engineer, but I'm just really like, I'm better with people than numbers, let's put it that way. I wouldn't trust me to add 2 and 2 and get the right answer. So starting out, you're working in an academic space where everything is so positivistic that no one even mentions it, right? It's simply the presumption. That is your default epistemology. That's what you're going to do. And so I was researching safety culture, as I mentioned earlier, and I was going to fix this. That shows what I need. And so I was going to fix this whole shooting match. And I, of course, was trying to look at ways of researching this. And my supervisor, bless him, Peter Farrell, absolute legend of a man, quantity surveyor, very engineering focused. I think we got nearly to the end of my PhD and he went, "You are doing a questionnaire, aren't you?" And I said, "Pete, no, I'm not, mate. I'm not." Because my whole thesis was a social construction. It was a discourse analysis of just the concept of safety in construction. It was hugely broad brush because that hadn't been done before. And yielded some really interesting stuff. But you kind of, I used to just simply get this kind of presumption of positivism. But people don't work like that. People aren't steel beams. They're messy, they're inconsistent. Even in the same sentence, people contradict themselves. They're always like changeable. You know, if you think about it, and this fitted my reality. So I knew that I was a different Fred with my mum at home. I was a different Fred in the pub. I was a different Fred on the site. I was a slightly different. And we create and recreate all our identities, ways of being in different situations. Now, positivism cannot grab that. You can't grab that with a number because it's always changing. So I was in this engineering school, and I'll tell you what I actually did. I ended up actually going back to Plato and his cave and the representations. And I ended up doing pretty much a whole kind of bunch of courses that I self-taught on philosophy. And I actually got in trouble in my thesis because my thesis wasn't examined by folks from engineering. It was examined by another social scientist and a linguist, actually, someone whose only research was within language, although they did work in construction. And I actually got in trouble for writing a whole chunky chapter on methodology, ontology, epistemology, because I was so worried that I was straying into these places where no sort of engineering professor would ever like want me to go. And I was expecting a big scrap, but luckily my examiners were very they got it, and that's how it should go. But we need to be really careful that social science methodologies are able to explain the mess and the nuance and the fact that things aren't consistent within people, because they're not. They're just not. And that's really important. I mean, safety itself is a social construct. It's not a tangible thing. It's what we make it through our, whether, and I'm all over the place epistemologically here, but it's either the norms or the ways of being or the behavioral interactions and all those different sorts of things. So that's what makes safety. So to try and then unpack that in a very kind of formulaic engineering positivistic way struggles, because it can't quite make sense of the fact that this is always changing and it's always wibbly and it doesn't actually exist, but it kind of does. And so it allows you to actually do meaningful research with all of those things included and accepted. So I love it. It's my favorite place to be, but I had to self-teach a whole ton because that wasn't going to happen any other way. But since then, I've played with a bunch of different methodologies like this. I absolutely love it.
So this is absolutely fascinating to me, and I'm very glad that we connected on this, because as a quantitative researcher myself, a lot of this stuff is really out of my wheelhouse. But with this type of podcast, what I don't want to do is close us off and only focus on, the quantitative stuff. I want to bring in these other methodologies and really explore those, because they all bring some sort of value to this profession and what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
So a few episodes back, I was talking to the listeners about fear appeals or threat appeals, basically scare tactics that are used in safety training.
Okay. Yep.
And so we looked through some different studies that are out there to explore whether those things were really effective in the long run, or if there was room for debate on that, or what research was out there. Well, one of the articles I ran across was this critical discourse analysis. And I don't know if my listeners remember that, or if they kind of spaced out when I said that term. It's fully possible. But, for me as a quantitative researcher, I did my best going through this article, trying to break down what that was. But I still kind of struggle to wrap my head around it. I think I'd probably have to spend as much time as you did really self-teaching these
Yeah.
types of methodologies to really fully grasp that. So, okay, so what is a critical discourse analysis, and why is this type of research important?
Okay. So firstly, I do know those presentations. I used to work for a construction manager that had a great back catalogue of really grim stuff we could slap into the to the inductions. Okay, so critical. So any kind of discourse analysis is not about what's being said as much as how it's being said. So when we start to look at how things are being said, we're looking at what's not being said. We're looking at what's being juxtaposed with what. We're looking at context. We're looking at sort of bigger pictures. So a good example of this is something that I found in my research, which was, let's talk about the very simple slogan, make safety personal. Okay. You might know whose that is, you might not, but I won't say. But that was one that I came across quite a bit when I was on site. And so make safety personal. Sounds great, doesn't it? But let's think about how it's saying it, okay? So make safety personal. What, you mean it wasn't before? What was it then? What if it wasn't personal? What are you kind of on about? And the other problem is making it personal. Well, if I'm a worker reading that, what is actually my level of agency and power to actually make anything? Do I
Mm,
not just turn up onto the job site and do what I'm told? So is this supposed to be helping? And it also, to some extent, you could argue that it others' responsibility, because if we're making safety personal, it's like those mirrors. This person is responsible for your safety on site. Well, I think you'll find that there's various bits of legislation that say that's not the case, and there's various bits of legislation. It's kind of absolving the I'll say main contractor, the people that are running the site. It's absolving them in part of their responsibility and shoving it down to the worker. And the workers know this, by the way. This isn't, I mean, discourse analysis isn't some magical ethereal thing that you have to have like all these qualifications to understand. Some of the people that understand discourse and critical discourse analysis is particularly where you are looking at structures of agency and power. But by the way, so if you're and it's taking that stance explicitly. So we're totally away from that quantitative wheelhouse of objectivity and bias and things like, forget all of that. You're not going to get away from it. So what the CDA does is actually enable you to incorporate it as long as you include your own levels of reflexivity. So I've never hid that I was a superintendent and I care most about workers. So you're not going to find my work trying to justify using a phrase like that, because the analysis tells me that this is actually this is about othering. It's about undermining actual agency of the people that you're trying to argue it with. And it can ultimately lead to resentment and disengagement. And I've seen that happen a bunch. I was a superintendent for a long time. We had incident injury free, which led into a big part of zero work. We've had all sorts of things. But so those three little words are saying a hell of a lot more than three little words. So does that help as an example, Matt?
it does, yeah. And I probably, I still think for me, it'll take a while to really get a hold of that. But it sounds it's super important. Okay, in the discourse around safety, there are a lot of terms I think that we use like that, like make safety personal. Probably things that we've heard a dozen times over, and they get used and frankly abused a lot of the time. So being able to look at that stuff in a different light, in a more all right, maybe here's what I'm thinking. It's taking me a second to sort of wrap my head around. Okay, I think that, and I've had this tangent before, right? We can go to conferences and people have presentations and they talk about all of these different things, and they'll have this sort of, you know, philosophical discussion about, why is safety first the wrong term to use, or why
Mm-hmm.
is safety always the right or wrong term to use? And I think we get locked into just sort of these big ideas, these debates about, should we change the name of something just for the sake of changing the name, or
Mm-hmm.
is it actually doing something. So to have some sort of methodology to actually dig into that in a more formal, more robust way, I think makes a lot of sense to me. Am I getting there or
Yes, no. And this methodology allows you to do that. So this is why having multi-methodological approaches to any phenomena is vital. So the work that you do is trying to tease into cause and effect quantitatively. You are trying to find a delta somewhere. This works, this doesn't work, this helps, this doesn't. The nuances that are around these more philosophical and discursive aspects to safety also do matter. I would argue, however, that I would avoid spending days navel gazing about the words you're using and actually think about how that is going to land with the workers.
Mhm.
Given if you so one of my biggest bugbears, so safety is our number one priority. Unless you're a safety company, it isn't, right? It just isn't, because otherwise you won't be doing whatever it is you're doing, whether you're I don't know, doing manufacturing, something like that. If you're not manufacturing, you're not in business. So safety isn't your number one priority. Manufacturing things is your number one priority. But the problem is with phrases like that, and I think that is one of the biggest disservices the safety industry ever did to anybody, because workers know that's a lie. They're not stupid. They know that's bollocks.
Mm.
So why do we keep saying it? But again, we shouldn't then spend hours and hours laboring over what we should say instead. Because what I would like to see the energy channeled into is doing things differently.
Mm.
So part of the biggest bugbear that I have with an awful lot of programs is that it's just a change in rhetoric with no real change in practice. And
Mm.
again, everyone can feel that. Nothing's changed. Oh, yay, I've got a new high-vis jumper with a different logo on the back for this week. Woohoo. But nothing else has fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem. But I do think that, so I've always thought, so when I said I had to teach myself all this social science and do things like that, I actually wrote a paper, and it's called You Are Going to Put Some Statistics in There, Aren't You? And it was all about the problems I'd had trying to do the research I've done, in a very positivistic construction engineering space. And I used to get things like, well, you can't generalize this. And I'm like, well, I never said you could, because my epistemological foundations say I can't. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Because if it finds resonance with somebody, it could spark a change or something more positive. But the best thing about doing this kind of discourse work is the people you need to go and talk to are the workers, by the way. It's not for safety people to sit around chewing on things, and just that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yes.
And again, if you analyze how the workers are talking discursively, rather than just say a safety climate, so I think this is right, that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is actually talk to them and see what they are juxtaposing with what are they not saying, what are they saying, what are they nearly everyone will, if you ask anybody about a safety program, they will nearly always say, oh, it's really good. And then you just have to stay there and count one, and they go, but, right?
Yeah.
Because safety is nearly and always yes, but situation. So, but then you're looking at what are they juxtaposing with the safety thing to reveal what are the actual biggest practical challenges. So it's about getting out and in amongst it. But these different methodologies, I've always felt a bit persecuted, because I've always get picked on for being not generalizable and there aren't any numbers. But I would say that the numbers stuff has loads of good value. If we can actually look at safety as something, and I always see it as looking at things through, I always imagine it like a crystal, one of them big sparkly cheesy crystals, and we're all just looking through a different facet, but put them all together and you get the whole thing. That's kind of my approach to it.
Yeah, no, okay. So now I think I'm really picking this up, and I think it's actually touching on a few of the pet peeves that I have personally in this profession. I think number one is when this we as safety professionals have this tendency, right, to silo ourselves in these discussions without really taking full account of the worker. Now, I don't think that's the intention. It's just what sort of happens when we start to really get in these debates and conversations. And we'll, I think probably the other pet peeve I have is, changing the name of something just for the sake of changing the name and not really delivering any action to it. My listeners have heard me say, well, near miss, near hit, who really gives a shit? That's how I put it, right?
Okay with that.
It's so stupid, but it's again, one of those things that really gets on me. But and then the last thing I think that's a pet peeve here is when we have these deep conversations and we think we're really moving the needle, but we deliver absolutely no action items for either ourselves or for the workers to really take this further, to take this the step it needs to go to make any really impact on what we're trying to do. So yeah, I think this is this is really important work, and especially digging into the discourse around the workers. So
Exactly. I mean, I think I've been very lucky because I came up on the girls' version of the tools, if you want to call it. I was always out on site as a superintendent. I was never a project manager. I still don't own a suit and never want to. So it's something that I've always been much more comfortable talking to those people. But the problem with safety siloing, which is a point you made that I think is really important, is that safety is a consequence of all the other operational functions of any business or organization. So how you're trying to other it, and I mean loads of other stuff. If you notice, everything gets othered other than production. I mean, how many people do we know who are HSWEQ in their job title? Let's put all the stuff that doesn't make us any money into a big blob and then make someone do it as their job. I mean, seriously? But we do. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could probably talk the whole rest of the episode about this, and this is just a really good discussion. But I do want to move on to a couple of the other questions that we have here. So, okay, so when we talked before, you had mentioned the zero paradox. So, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So again, the zero work started when I was still on site, and we got incident and injury free, which was an American initiative that Lang O'Rourke were implementing on the UK construction sites. And firstly, this was fascinating to me because it was really obvious, because I've lived here now for 3.5 years. I've been in the US. We're totally different countries. I mean, the shared language, but everything else, no. So I found it really quite interesting to be sat with all my steel fixers in the training. And they're all talking about your feelings. Now, I don't know if you knew any English blokes that did steel fixing in the 90s, but they did not want to talk about their feelings. So so firstly, there's a kind of culture mismatch. So anyway, so we get incident injury free, and it's all about trying to get to zero incidents. And everyone, like every slogan that we've talked about already, okay, all right, we're going to do this. Has anything else changed? Nope. But we're going for incident and injury free. Well, you talk to construction workers in the field and they're like, well, it's a great idea, but it's not going to happen unless we do something else. So what I was keen to do, the very first paper I wrote was in 2013 on this one, so that shows you how old I am. And and I just thought, right, I'm going to have a look at this. So I did a critical discourse analysis. I spoke to workers. I looked at all the documentation that had been produced, all the stickers, the hoarding posters, all this kind of thing. And it was super interesting because what it actually showed was that there's two types of zero. There's the one that corporate think you can have. The C-suite think that you can actually get to zero, and this is going to work in this messy reality that we have. Whereas the workers are like, we've got a messy reality, we're not going to get there, but we still want to kind of aim for it. We want that to be our castle in the sky because it gives us a bit of hope for the future, but we don't think it's going to happen in our day and age, if you kind of get me. So it brought up loads of different interesting narratives about it. Also, there's other problems such as, well, if we have one accident, has that ruined it? Zero from when? The very first one, zero harm, that was brought in the UK, they actually had a strapline of by 2012. So, of course, 2012 came and went and they had not achieved zero. So they repositioned the strapline and now they've dropped it. So that tells you about making yourself a hostage to fortune, doesn't it? So I did some discursive work on it, and the zero paradox actually comes from the data, the fatality data, serious injury. No, it's the fatality data from the UK over a period of 5 years, and the paradox was that you were actually more likely. Oh no, it was a SIF. Serious injury and fatality. You were more likely to have a serious injury and fatality on a site that was doing a zero program than one that wasn't.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
it doesn't really help or change anything or make anything, but it was bizarre. And that data, you were more likely to, very basic statistics. And I had a funny interaction with Tom Krause about this once upon a time, because the serious injury and fatalities, you haven't actually got enough data to do any serious statistical analyses. And do you know what? I'm okay with that we didn't kill enough people so we could do the math.
Seriously.
Yep. So I'm okay with that. But you would think, I mean, in this paper and the one I did on the American data, you would think the American data is not so dramatic, because it just isn't. But the thing is that neither of them shows any sign that doing zero helps in any way. If you set a target of zero, there is no evidence that shows companies that did this then went on to achieve it. It just doesn't work like that. So it was super interesting. So there's a few papers that I've written about that. The most recent one, it uses the American data, and whilst the relation, it didn't show, unfortunately, it didn't show quite as dramatically that you were more likely to have an incident on a zero site, but it didn't actually show you were any less likely either. And admittedly, I will totally accept that the numbers are not big enough to enable us to do serious stats, but you'd think it'd show something. Like, and there just isn't anything there to grab. And zero has always been a big thing for me, firstly because it's so offensive when people say, oh, you don't like zero, you must want people to get hurt. And I'm like, excuse me, really? Because my biggest problem with zero is the second you say that to a worker, they know you're talking bullshit, because they know that if you're going to be big on zero, all right then, well, let's change how we do procurement in construction. Let's stop going for lowest cost tenders. Let's stop asking people for best price and best schedule. Let's actually do something that shows we mean this, instead of just wandering around going zero. We can achieve zero harm. Yeah, it's the problem I have with it is it's more likely to disengage people from bigger safety things than anything else, because as soon as you start going, oh, this zero, yeah, they don't know what they're on about, you then also start to diminish the value of anything else we do for safety, and that's not good, particularly when some of those things are as basic as direct controls and fundamentals, particularly within construction and high hazard industries.
Yeah.
So there's my potted zero rant.
No, that's great. This is such an important discussion, and I've heard it talked about before. I don't know if I've heard it talked about as intelligently as you just put it. So I really appreciate the discussion here. It's something again, so much of what I try to do with this podcast is sort of a self-examination of the things that we do and the way that we operate in this profession. By bringing in the research, by bringing in the evidence of, from all different corners of the earth to try to make sure that we're looking at the right things and we're addressing things in the right manner. But we have to take a little bit of time to really self-reflect. Is this the right goal? By setting a goal like this, does it actually push us in the right direction, or are we just sort of setting a weird goal and not really delivering any actionable items to go along with that? So yeah, it's a really important discussion, and I appreciate you digging into that a little bit. Another very common topic, and I know this came up in our previous discussion as well, another very common topic that I see discussed in the safety profession is this idea of building a business case for safety, and especially aligning such a business case with corporate initiatives like corporate social responsibility and environmental, social, and governance. Can we talk a little bit about some of the work you've done on this topic?
Okay. Yeah, so I have got a paper to share on this, which I'm not sure quite how it's going to land, but let me go into it. Okay. So first and foremost, we all want there to be the moral, we want to be able to make a business case for safety, right? All of us in our hearts want to be able to do this, but that doesn't always make it possible. And nice guys don't always win. Because if we look at sort of how various big organizations have behaved in various other fields, well, BP are doing all right, aren't they? And I'm going to leave that there. But so we do want this to happen. But unfortunately, the second we step in to any kind of economic context around capitalism, neoliberalism, the valorization of profit over everything else, which is what we have in the West and which is currently now exploding everywhere else, unfortunately, that within this particular system, work is going to hurt unless we change how we're doing it. If we are going to try and make a business case within the current economic climate, we're going to struggle, because, as I said earlier, it's not necessarily what happens on the site. And I'll take this straight back to construction, if that's okay. What we're trying to mess with that matters there is all the upstream stuff, the blunt end stuff, the stuff that I've just mentioned. Your procurement system probably has more influence on the safety of your workers than anything else. But we're not going to touch that, because that's going to make us uncompetitive, and that's going to challenge the business, because safety isn't our number one priority. Doing business in the business that we're doing is. So we really tend to sort of not dig into this sort of too much. And yeah, if you look at how construction workers work, so they come onto site and they give their labor for money. Okay, so this is kind of how this works, right? That's capitalism. The workers become part of the means of production. And in doing so, they're not only giving their time, but they're giving their blood, sweat, and tears, let's call it that. So their health is going to get diminished by what we do because of the ways we are still doing it. So a bricklayer is kind of inevitably going to get musculoskeletal issues, lower back issues, because of how you lay bricks. You twist. That's how you do it.
Sure.
It's baked in to the actual production system. So if that production system is the one that we are going to leverage as a business in order to make profits and remain viable, we need to actually accept that we're actually using our workers up here. So to make a business case from if you protect workers, you're going to make more profit, that doesn't actually always stack up. And we've seen in cases where people have tried to do, I mean, it would do, and I think we're going to touch on this later, because you can do it, but everyone has to agree. It has to be a collective decision. So we have to make a collective decision that we are going to be okay with dropping our profit. I mean, construction profits are tiny anyway, from 4 to 3%, in order to take more time and invest more money in order to keep the workers safe. Now, that works if all the clients agree to it and everyone agrees to it. But as we currently stand, I don't think you can make that case. And I've never actually found any research that has done so. I've seen a lot of research saying we need to make the business case for safety, but you're not going to make a business case for something where it's been othered operationally, as we mentioned earlier. I mean, how are we going to do that justification when that isn't actually our business? But what ESG and corporate social responsibility have done is they have, in part, and I'll stand by this assertion, that what they have done is made it look like we've never cared more, but we haven't actually changed anything. What we've done is create a whole other industry around CSR and ESG, demonstrating what you've done. And it used to drive me up the bloody wall. You get Twitter posts of, oh, our workers are having fruity Fridays because fruit looks pretty and it's brightly coloured and it looks great in kind of posts and things. Whereas what you actually want is a better dust suppression system. But dust suppression is not sexy, and it doesn't look good in a picture because you can't even see anyone's face because they're covered in a big mat. You can't see their big grin as they're eating an apple, which is not going to do them any good if they've got a humper roll of vinyl up 4 flights of stairs. You try doing that on an apple when what you actually need is a cooked breakfast, right? So it's interesting. And if we think about how occupational health safety management actually came to be, I'm afraid that's built on the bodies of a lot of dead workers, actually. There was never an imperative for a business case for safety. There was marches in the UK when the Factories Acts first came out in the early 1800s to actually get some legislation in place. And of course, all the politicians in the UK at the time were the people who owned the factories and really didn't want to have to do this because there isn't a business case. What they wanted to do was keep their businesses operating as profitably as possible. And it took an awful amount of effort to get us to even simply have legislation to enable this to happen. So why we suddenly we really want it to be true, but in the way that we have organized the way the world works, I'm not convinced that that can actually be achieved.
Okay, interesting.
But if we own up to that, that's fine.
Yeah.
Why can't we just be honest? If we were honest with our workers and stop saying bollocks like safety's our number one priority, we're probably going to get a lot more traction. We could work with the workers who do this stuff every day to actually try and design out modes of production that are actually damaging to their work, their health. We don't have to do things this way just because we always have. But there seems to be a lot less appetite for going into how do we cast concrete walls? How do we fly shutters? How do we tie rebar? Than there is in let's produce a lovely shiny ESG report that shows all the wonderful things we've done that haven't actually shifted the dial fundamentally at all.
Yeah. There's, gosh, I wish there were more folks looking at it in such a critical way, and even doing more of the research to bring some of these things to light. I know of a couple folks. There's room to examine these things a little bit more critically. It's not all sunshine and butterflies and rainbows. There's in some cases there's a real purpose behind it, but the execution is flawed. And that's really where we're struggling right now. And until we get to a more, I don't know, standardized, measured way of doing these things, we have to be able to self-examine on those things.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's interesting. Anybody that's doing safety and doesn't also do economics, politics, and power, I'm not sure what you're doing. I mean, those are the only three topics worthy of conversation, really, aren't they?
Fair.
But those are what shapes our world. And you can't say, you mentioned previously the siloing and the othering of safety, which is one of our biggest problems. Because we do need to get into the commercial aspects of work. We do need to get into the operational aspects of work. We can't just retrofit ourselves around it. We ought to be in there making a whole bunch of noise, trying to actually change fundamentally. I mean, we hear an awful lot about systemic safety and things like that, and context drives behavior. Yeah, it does. So let's change the context. Rather than just sitting there cheering ourselves up with how you respond matters. I mean, these things are easy to say. They're really hard to do. So even if we're accepting context drives behavior, and that lets us look at safety culture or however we want to spin that, the brave people will actually just forget the rest of it. Just get into your context.
Yeah.
See what that is doing that is damaging and causing problems for safety. And you'd probably do a million times more impactful work than tweaking around the edges of what can we staple on that looks pretty in a brochure at the end of every year.
Yeah.
I'm a cynical witch, aren't
I? No, it's perfectly fine. Honestly, these are things that drive me on tangents all day, right? Because you said the context drives behavior. It's been interesting to watch the safety profession evolve as it has. Moving from one concept to the next and the next. And it's funny to also watch us, any given organization safety program and how it will evolve and mature through almost the exact same cycle that our whole profession has done. Sort of like starting with the compliance and then suddenly discovering behavioral based safety. And that's the way we're going to go right now. And then we're not really figuring, that's not really working for us. We're going to go to this HOP thing. Let's do HOP now. And then let's do SIF, right? So if you watch the evolution of a safety program, it's really interesting to see how it mirrors, how we've evolved as a profession. But also the danger is that all of those things carry some merit, and moving to one concept doesn't mean we completely abandon the other. I keep telling folks, behavioral based safety, it's not dead. We just never did it right. The context driving behavior, there are plenty of proven models from my work in the public health space that fit really well into how you shape a person's behavior. And it's all this other stuff that you have to do, and you have to measure those things along the way. And if you're not doing those things and you're not measuring them, well, then no, behavioral based safety is not going to work for you.
Yeah, I think the how you're doing it matters. So I think there's two things I'd like to add there. Firstly, two things can work at the same time. Two things can be true. And we live in a world where social media has polarized. You're either one or the other. You're either right or wrong. Something has to happen. I mean, it struck me since moving here that in America, in a team sports, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. right? In the UK, we can have a cricket match that lasts 5 days, and at the end of it, nobody wins. It's not even a draw.
Mm-hmm.
It's just nobody wins, right? We could spend 5 days on a sport that nothing happens. But this has been it's either or, and it doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. There isn't a winner or a loser. And as you say, certain elements in behavioral based safety can work super well in fixed set environment. It doesn't work on construction because if you're not changing the environment, you're not making any money. So
Mm-hmm.
it's much harder to manage. And I can understand why folks kind of didn't do that. But in various other industrial high hazard settings, I can see it working super well. And I think there's also, to some extent, a correlation. And this might, I mean, this might not do me any favors in the long run. There is a correlation between what happens to be the kind of latest thing and how much it actually costs to implement. So psychological safety, okay. How much does that cost to do other than everyone just goes, oh, you can trust us and you can talk and everybody can do this? I mean, that's cheap as chips.
Mm-hmm.
To actually then undo a practical production system and redo it so it's safer, that costs money.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of, and I'm not talking about the money about having to do all the training courses and putting everybody through that, but look at what it actually means for kind of CapEx and things like that and what you're doing and a lot of things. I mean, I would put SIF in a bubble because I think SIF is actually something that sits above everything. If we can stop killing people, that would be real nice, and then we can look at everything else. I'm totally here for that. But the some of the other elements I can see are particularly attractive because of the amount of energy and effort that they would require for implementation. And again, that's the cynicism popping out again.
Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, cynicism is definitely appreciated on this podcast. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about your work. So I want to start with something that you mentioned in our previous conversation. You have a book called Unpacking Construction Site Safety. What is this book about, and why should folks consider picking it up?
Okay, so this book is kind of my greatest hits of safety because I kind of fell out with it for a little bit back in the day because I got tired of saying time and money. So the pieces of research I was doing kept coming to the same kind of conclusions, as it were, and I was getting a bit hoarse shouting that at people perpetually. So this book is actually it's a culmination of all the discursive work that I had done around safety in construction. So, but what it also does is for people wanting to know a bit more about discourse analysis and things like that, it has a whole introductory, it takes you by the hand and leads you through what can discourses tell us about safety. Why does wider society matter? Why does the bigger economic structures matter? What's the history of all of this sort of thing? And then what it does is it pulls up and unpacks quite a few of the dominant discourses that you find generally in construction. So this notion that things can be a bit unsafe. So that's really unhelpful if you're trying to do a checklist or an audit. It's either safe or not. We only talk in binary. Safety isn't binary. It's a million shades of grey. Took me plant out there. It's a million shades of grey, right? It's not one or the other. And things do get a little bit unsafe. And that's how workers talk about it and understand it. So straight away, that's suggesting that the lexicon that we're using as safety professionals is not actually fitting with reality at all. So there's a thing you ought to kind of be. So it's insights like that that discursive analysis can really bring to the fore. So there's chapters in here about engagement and enforcement. We've had a big thing about worker engagement, right? We want to get the workers on side, get them invested. Let's make safety personal. Don't forget that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to get the workers engaged. But what I found was quite a lot of the ways in which we try to do that. All we're doing is wrapping the language of enforcement in engagement, and there isn't really any meaningful engagement happening again. It again turns in to this linguistic kind of spectre that's trying to make something feel a lot more cuddly than it actually is. And interestingly, within that discourse, certainly in construction, because in construction, as we discussed, loads of it's workarounds. You can't do half the work as planned. I mean, I was a co-author on a great paper at a conference a while back called "You Couldn't Finish the Job Without Breaking the Rules," which
Mm-hmm.
you quite often can't in construction. If you were going to adhere to every single safety rule that was going, you would not get anything done. So the workers actually need a level of enforcement in order to keep them on the right track, because they know that the supervisors know that they're going to have to do something that isn't quite by the book in order to get the job done. That's your blue line, black line workers, planned workers done. But they need that kind of formal structure in order to legitimize and pull them back into where they know they ought to be but aren't, because you can't actually do that. So again, this is the messiness of reality. But we're kidding ourselves if it's anything other than this. So it's the engagement enforcement discourse. I think I that's been published in Construction Management Economics, the journal, as well. But that is, to me, fascinating in how we are messing with these two areas, but also how the workforce actually appreciate being involved in those two very different ways, and to what extent, and how that could find optimum fit in terms of making a construction site better. There's also a bit about zero in here, because of course there is. And then the other thing to note for those who are super interested in safety culture is that there is the way that discourses work. Discourses are key building blocks of a wider culture. So even though I would still argue to this day you can't measure safety culture, what you can do is get some insights and illumination into how it is emerging, evolving, perpetuating, existing within a certain space through the dominant discourses that you find there when talking about a specific phenomenon. So if you actually want to know what your safety culture is on a job site, in a crew, in a company, I can go talk to, you can use discourse analysis through talking to people, looking at documents, images, signage, all of those elements combined, drawing out those discourses. And then you're able to say, well, actually, you're actually shaped by, there is this predominance of enforcement over engagement, which is annoying your workers. Maybe shift that up a little bit. It can give you better insights, and certainly more nuanced and subtle insights than any paper climate survey ever could. So anyway, so the book, I highly recommend it. I think it's cheaper than it was when it first came out, because it is an academic text, but it does fairly bob along. I do enjoy writing, so I get a few compliments on that. But it's quite interesting, and it does set out kind of how we can look at things in a different way within safety. So fill your boots. And I can I just say that this cover design is actually my husband's photography, but he didn't get a credit. He never got a credit in the end on the back of the book. So I just want to give him a little shout out, even though it's an amalgamation of 3 different buildings in Manchester. That's why it's all a bit damp and rainy. But but there you go.
Very cool. Well, I'm gonna put a link to. I think you sent me a link to the book, so I'm gonna make sure that's included in the episode notes, along with some of the other things that you shared. So, and I think a lot of this conversation leads us to this next question, which is about straight talk safety. So, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, yeah. So I'm no longer, well, she says, hopefully I will soon be reaffiliated with the university, because obviously I was a full professor back in the day in the UK. So I'm playing with that at the minute. But in the meantime, what I've done is I've set up my own consultancy in order to try and keep making a positive difference to construction worker safety. Okay, so there's a variety of things that I want to do. And the other thing that's really important is that I'm hoping to be able to still support a philanthropic aspect of what I do. So I currently lead the international research group for the CIB on construction worker health, safety and wellbeing. It's Commission W099 that I look after. And that obviously has conferences and things that I would want to be able to continue to do and provide leadership to that group. It's one of the funnest things I get to do, and I really want to keep that going. But what I'm trying to do with Straight Talk Safety is actually really start to work with companies to dig into these complicated bits. I don't think there's a particular sort of way that that's being done at the moment. but also you could to get people to come in, and something I do offer is facilitation. Your safety people know what they want to do, and they have been out there in the workers. They kind of, but it needs teasing out. And I'm very, very good at teasing out in terms of talking to people, getting things going, helping walk people through analysis of things, member checking with the people who are actually in the organization. So it's not a traditional safety consultancy. I haven't got any courses and things like that. But what it is a very bespoke and tailored way that I can help you understand, learn more about how safety works in your organization in a way that enables you to bring real meaningful change. Rather than, I certainly am agnostic in everything. We've talked over elements of behavior-based safety, HOP, psych safety, all these other elements. I'm not again any of them, but it's how they operate within your particular safety space. And I'd love to get in amongst some interesting companies and job sites to find out how that works. But I think that the value in the insights that it provides in doing things a different way, I certainly don't have a survey that you can employ that's cheap as chips and easy peasy, because in my mind, I know that that isn't going to really help you move the needle. What is probably a much richer, more invested, take the time to do it. And I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this because this is what has driven me for years and years. You don't get paid much for books, by the way. That was a labor of love. I also do a whole bunch of other things. I review for all sorts of papers. There's a lot that you can do to try and help improve worker safety. Certainly internationally, I collaborate with people all around the world all of the time in these particular subject areas so that we can all learn best what's going on from each other. So it's an interesting venture. I'm optimistic. I'm hoping that it will sort of get some legs and start doing things. But it would be, if you're listening to this and you're curious about what can happen, or you need somebody to make your safety day away day absolutely awesome, all this research is just in here, and I can draw on it at will. That's kind of what being a professor is all about. But it's to kind of re-enthuse and re-energize and bring people to the idea that we can make a much better difference. We can do positive things, whether that's through working with people. And you have to co-create this stuff. You have to bring people along with you. There's nobody that I am happier talking to than a whole bunch of construction workers, mainly because then I don't have to mind my P's and Q's so much. And nobody cares that I'm absolutely covered in tattoos. So it's kind of fun. But so I'm seeing how that goes. And yeah, if folks are interested, do just reach out, say hi, see if there's anything that we could kind of do. And as you can tell by that terrible sales pitch, I'm not very good at that.
I think it was perfectly fine. I'm bought in here.
I'm no good at this.
You did mention CIB, and I wanted to give you a chance to, elaborate on that shout out if you wanted to, while we still got a couple minutes here.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, CIB is it's actually a construction specific. It's around research and innovation in the built environment, but it has a UN charter. It's a big organization. It has commissions covering all sorts of different things. And myself and my colleague, Professor Billy Hare at Glasgow Cali Uni in Scotland, we joint lead that, and we have done since 2019. We're doing some really, I think, good stuff. We won an award for our leadership, so I'm going to claim that.
Awesome.
And what we're trying to do at the minute is we have an annual conference every year. And Billy and I, we've adopted Mother Jones's motto. So the motto of our commission is actually remember the dead and fight like hell for the living, because we are all in this game to stop workers getting hurt. And the international reach, I think we've got researchers and academics on every continent except Antarctica. Anyone in Antarctica listening, please reach out. But we are, so we're moving our conference to areas where the academics may be more constrained through travel or conference costs. So we had a great conference in West Africa at Noost, University in Kumasi in Ghana, where we were able to get loads of the local academics. And this is where people need to be able to share that knowledge and learn. So we're trying to really take the construction safety research group to different parts of the world where it really, really matters, and how we can help them develop their own. Because just as a coda to that, the Western model of development isn't great. We still kill people all the damn time. And there's nothing more frustrating than seeing people trying to replicate things where I think there is a better option. So it was super fascinating to write a paper with my colleague, Emmanuel Nemo, which is actually about the decolonization of safety and safety research. Because in a lot of post-colonial countries, you find that they are implementing the kind of legacy, still implementing the legacy of their colonial invaders. And what we're finding is that just doesn't have a good fit with the local culture community. And people end up working in cross-cultural challenges where they really shouldn't have to. But we're doing that because of these legacies. So there's all sorts of, on a global scale, I'm really, I try and really help out everywhere possible. And that shows why I'm really bad at making money. Because there's not a lot of cash in that.
I totally get that. Yeah, awesome. So there are about a dozen things that I'd still like to talk to you about. And I think we're going to have to save that for another episode. I'd love to have you back on.
Absolutely. Oh, that would be wonderful, Matt. I'd love to join you.
There's a ton of things to dig into here. Maybe even there's an opportunity if I run into another one of these critical discourse analyses, I'll just bring you on to help me run through that.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have a follow-up conversation at some point. In the meantime, how can listeners connect with you to learn more about you and your work?
Okay, well, luckily I have a really weird name. So if you just Google Fred Sherratt, I come up. I believe about 10 years ago, there was an artist in Tennessee who had the same name as me. Lovely old looking fella. But so there's just me. So definitely, or straighttalksafety.com is through the website. And the website, I spent a bit of time on that because you can find out more about my research philosophy. You can find out more about safety being a social construction. There's links to all my selected back catalogue of papers, because there's there aren't 150 papers on there, which I think is where I'm about in terms of writing. So all the best ones are on there, but also a bit more about the industry background and the service that I also try and provide to the international research communities on there as well. Or you can just email hello@straighttalksafety.com and that will find me as well. And I'm sure folks are kind of realizing why it's called Straight Talk Safety, because I am really not very good at sugarcoating and spinning things. So they land more palatably. But in safety and with workers and all the lads I used to work next to on job sites, there isn't room for that kind of fluff, I'm afraid. People are still getting hurt, and we really could do so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Fred, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. This is definitely up there in my top 5 discussions I've ever had. This is a lot of fun. So I definitely want to bring you back on. Thanks for coming on. Thank you for the lively discussion, and I look forward to seeing more of your work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt. I hope to be back soon talking with you again soon. Thank you.
I absolutely loved that conversation, and I certainly hope to have Fred back on the podcast soon. All right, so just as a quick reminder, if you have research that you want to share on the podcast, whether it's your own or just a really cool study you found or some research you've been able to effectively put into practice, send me an email at contact@proveitpod.com. Until next time, I'm Dr. Matt Law. Thanks for listening to the Prove It To Me podcast. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.